Sarah's hands trembled as she recognized the battered, exhausted horse standing in her moonlit field. Her beloved Midnight had somehow escaped from a rodeo and impossibly found her new home. The fresh whip marks across his once gleaming coat warned that their miraculous reunion would soon become a desperate fight for his freedom. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. The air at the rodeo grounds carried the lingering scent of dust, sweat, and livestock. As night fell, the once boisterous arena gradually quieted, with only the occasional nickering of horses breaking the silence. Among the animals housed in the temporary stables was Midnight Storm, a magnificent black quarter horse with a distinctive white star on his forehead. His powerful muscles rippled beneath a glossy coat that seemed to absorb what little moonlight filtered through the slats of his stall. Yet despite his impressive physique, there was something profoundly sad in his eyes, a melancholy that had been present since he arrived at the traveling rodeo 3 months ago. Midnight stood restless in his stall, ears twitching at every sound, nostrils flaring as he caught unfamiliar scents. He wasn't like the other rodeo horses that had grown accustomed to the constant travel and the roar of crowds. Each night, Midnight would pace, his hooves wearing a path in the sawdust. The handlers chalked it up to stubbornness, a trait that made him both a challenge and a marvel in the arena. What they didn't understand was that Midnight was searching, always searching for something or someone that wasn't there. "That horse is going to be the death of me," muttered Carlos, the young stable hand tasked with looking after the most difficult animals. He rubbed his shoulder, still sore from when Midnight had pushed past him that morning. 3 months and he still acts like he just got here yesterday. The head trainer, Mike, a weathered man with 30 years of rodeo experience etched into the lines of his face, looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. "Some horses never take to this life, but he's too valuable to let go. Did you double-check his stall latch?" Carlos nodded, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "I think so." "Think so isn't good enough with that one," Mike warned, setting down his pencil. "Go check again before you leave. Last thing we need is that beast getting loose overnight." Carlos sighed but dutifully trudged back toward the stables. The lights had been dimmed for the night, and the shadowy forms of horses created an almost ethereal atmosphere. Most of the animals were already dozing, their breathing deep and rhythmic. But as Carlos approached Midnight's stall, he noticed the horse was still awake, standing perfectly still, dark eyes gleaming like polished onyx in the dim light. "Easy, boy," Carlos whispered, reaching for the latch to ensure it was secured. Midnight didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Something about his stillness made Carlos uneasy. It wasn't natural. It was like the horse was waiting for something. The young man quickly confirmed the latch was fastened and backed away, feeling Midnight's gaze follow him all the way out of the stable. Hours later, when the rodeo grounds were silent except for the distant hum of highway traffic, Midnight made his move. With deliberate care, he used his teeth to work at the latch of his stall. The rodeo staff had installed additional security measures after his first escape attempt, but Midnight had been watching, learning. Each night he had tested the mechanism, determining through trial and error how it functioned. Tonight, something finally gave. The soft click of the latch releasing was barely audible, but to Midnight, it sounded like freedom. He nudged the stall door with his muzzle, pushing it open just wide enough to slip through. His hooves made little noise on the sawdust-covered floor as he navigated through the stable, past the sleeping forms of other horses. Some lifted their heads, watching with quiet curiosity as Midnight made his way toward the exit. The night air greeted him with 1,000 scents: grass, trees, distant water, and the acrid tang of asphalt. Midnight paused at the edge of the rodeo grounds, his ears swiveling to detect any signs of human presence. But the security guard was dozing in his chair near the main entrance, radio playing softly beside him. With nothing to impede him, Midnight slipped into the darkness, his black coat making him nearly invisible against the night. He had no map, no plan beyond escape, yet something pulled him forward. An invisible thread connecting him to a place that existed only in his memory. His powerful legs carried him away from the rodeo grounds, instinct guiding him toward the outskirts of town. He moved with purpose, avoiding the main roads when possible, keeping to the shadows when he couldn't. Miles away, in a small farmhouse set back from a winding country road, Sarah Collins woke with a start. The 38-year-old former horse trainer sat up in bed, her heart racing though she couldn't identify what had awakened her. Outside, the wind rustled through the maple trees that surrounded her property, a sound that usually lulled her to sleep rather than disturbed it. She pushed aside the quilt and swung her legs over the edge of the bed, wincing as pain shot through her right leg, a permanent reminder of the accident that had changed everything 2 years ago. Sarah reached for the cane that leaned against her nightstand and slowly made her way to the window. Moonlight bathed her 5 acres in silver, illuminating the empty paddock and the small barn that hadn't housed animals in nearly a year. She gazed out at the property that had once been her pride and joy, Collins Training Stables, where she had worked with some of the finest horses in 3 counties. Now it stood empty, a monument to dreams derailed. The accident had taken more than her mobility. It had stolen her confidence, her livelihood, and ultimately her beloved horses. Unable to care for them properly, she had been forced to sell most of her animals. All except for one, her prize quarter horse, Midnight Storm. Him she had given to a trusted friend who promised to give him a good home. The separation had nearly broken her, but she had convinced herself it was for the best. Midnight deserved more than an owner who could barely walk across a paddock without pain searing through her leg. Sarah was about to turn away from the window when movement at the edge of her property caught her eye. Something large and dark was moving across the field toward her house. At first, she thought it might be a deer, but as it drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. The silhouette was unmistakable. The powerful build, the graceful gait she would recognize anywhere. "It can't be," she whispered, her free hand pressing against the cool glass of the window. But as the animal stepped into a patch of moonlight, the white star on its forehead gleamed like a beacon in the darkness. Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Midnight Storm, her Midnight, was standing in her field, looking toward the house as if he had never left. For a moment Sarah remained frozen, convinced she was dreaming. Then the horse nickered, the sound carrying through the night air and straight to her heart. It was a sound that had greeted her every morning for 5 years, a sound she had never expected to hear again. Disregarding her cane, Sarah stumbled to the back door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the knob. Pain shot through her leg with each step, but she barely noticed. All that mattered was getting to Midnight, confirming that he was real and not some cruel trick of her imagination. She threw open the door and stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool against her skin. "Midnight," she called, her voice wavering. The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of her voice, and he took several steps closer before stopping, as if uncertain. Sarah descended the porch steps slowly, one hand braced against the railing for support. Her bare feet felt the dew-dampened grass, grounding her in the reality of the moment. "Midnight," she called again, stronger this time. "Is it really you, boy?" The distance between them seemed insurmountable to Sarah, whose leg throbbed with each step. But then Midnight moved, closing the gap between them with a few graceful strides. And suddenly, he was there, his warm breath fanning against her face, his familiar scent enveloping her. Sarah raised a trembling hand and placed it on his muzzle, feeling the soft hair beneath her fingertips. "How did you find me?" she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "How are you here?" Sarah buried her face in Midnight's mane, inhaling the scent that brought memories flooding back. Early mornings in the stable, the rhythmic sound of hooves during their training sessions, the quiet moments when the world seemed to consist of just the two of them. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the significance of their reunion. "You shouldn't be here," Sarah whispered, though her arms remained wrapped around his strong neck. "But God, I've missed you." Midnight nuzzled against her shoulder, his familiar gesture of affection. For a moment, Sarah forgot about her injury, about the past 2 years of struggle and loneliness. But when she shifted her weight, pain shot through her right leg, a harsh reminder of reality. She grimaced, reluctantly releasing her hold on Midnight to lean against him for support. The horse didn't move, seemingly aware of her need for stability. In the moonlight, Sarah examined him more closely. His coat, though still beautiful, lacked the gleaming luster she had once maintained with daily brushing. There were small nicks and scars on his flanks that hadn't been there before, and he seemed thinner than she remembered. But his eyes, those intelligent, soulful eyes, were exactly as she remembered, now regarding her with what she could only describe as relief. "What happened to you?" she murmured, running her hands along his neck and shoulders, taking inventory of his condition. "Where's Mark? How did you get here?" As if in response, Midnight gently nudged her back toward the house. Sarah smiled despite her confusion. "Always looking out for me, aren't you?" she said, realizing she was standing outside in her nightgown, barefoot and without her cane. "All right, let's get inside, though I have no idea what I'm going to do with you." The journey back to the house was slow, with Sarah leaning against Midnight for support. Each step sent waves of pain through her damaged leg, but the warmth of the horse beside her made it bearable. When they reached the porch, Sarah reluctantly let go of Midnight to navigate the steps. "Stay," she commanded softly, though she wasn't sure if he would obey after so long apart. To her relief, Midnight remained where she left him, watching as she made her way into the house. Sarah grabbed her cane and a flashlight, then returned to the porch. Her mind was racing. A horse couldn't just appear out of nowhere, especially not one she had given away 2 years ago. Mark Reynolds lived over 30 miles away. Had Midnight escaped from him? Had something happened to Mark? Sarah descended the steps again, more carefully this time with her cane for support. "Come on, boy," she said, gesturing toward the barn. "Let's get you settled for the night. Tomorrow we'll figure this all out." The small barn had stood empty since she'd sold her last horse, but she still kept it clean and maintained, unable to fully let go of her past life. Walking into it now with Midnight beside her felt surreal, like stepping back in time. The familiar smell of hay and wood shavings enveloped them as Sarah flipped on the lights. "It's not much anymore," she apologized, looking around at the emptiness that had once been a bustling 6-stall operation. "But it's shelter." She led Midnight to what had once been his stall. The nameplate was still there, Midnight Storm, a small detail she hadn't been able to remove despite knowing she should move on. She had kept the stall stocked with fresh bedding out of habit, or perhaps hope. "I don't have much in the way of feed," Sarah said, feeling inadequate. "Just some old hay. I'll get proper supplies in the morning." As she worked to make Midnight comfortable, her mind filled with questions. The most pressing was how he had found her. Her current home wasn't the large training facility where Midnight had spent most of his life with her. After the accident, when medical bills mounted and her prognosis for returning to work remained uncertain, she had been forced to sell her business. This small property, with its modest house and barn, was all she could afford, a different location, miles from where Midnight would have remembered. Yet somehow, he had found her. Sarah filled a water bucket and placed it in the stall. Midnight drank deeply, confirming her suspicion that he had traveled a long distance. When he finished, he turned to her and gently pressed his forehead against her chest, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. "I know, boy," she whispered, stroking his muzzle. "I know." Eventually, Sarah reluctantly left Midnight in the stall and made her way back to the house. Sleep was impossible now. Her mind was too full of questions, her heart too full of emotions she had suppressed for 2 years. Instead, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, where she had a clear view of the barn through the window. As the first hints of dawn colored the sky, Sarah reached for her phone. She scrolled to Mark Reynolds' number, hesitating before pressing call. They hadn't spoken in months. After she'd given Midnight to him, maintaining contact had been too painful, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Mark had respected her need for distance, only sending occasional texts to assure her that Midnight was doing well. The call went straight to voicemail. Sarah left a brief message asking him to call her back as soon as possible, trying to keep the urgency from her voice. She wasn't sure what to say anyway. "Your horse showed up at my house in the middle of the night," seemed too bizarre to be believable. As morning light spilled across her kitchen, Sarah made another call, this time to her friend Elena, the local veterinarian who had treated her horses for years. "You're not going to believe this," Sarah said when Elena answered. "Try me," Elena replied, her voice warm with affection. "After 20 years in veterinary practice, very little surprises me anymore. Midnight is here, at my house, in my barn." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Midnight? Your Midnight? The one you gave to Mark Reynolds 2 years ago?" "The very same," Sarah confirmed. "I woke up last night and he was just here, standing in my field like he'd never left." "That's impossible," Elena said slowly. "Mark's place is over 30 miles away, and how would Midnight even know where to find you? You moved after you sold him." "I know how it sounds," Sarah admitted, "but he's here. I spent half the night with him. And Elena, he doesn't look good. Not mistreated exactly, but definitely not how Mark would keep him. There are marks on him like he's been, I don't know, used hard." Elena's tone shifted to professional concern. "I'll come by this morning. I want to check him over, and frankly, I need to see this miracle with my own eyes." After hanging up, Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee and stared out at the barn. The sun now illuminated it fully, making it impossible to dismiss the night's events as a dream. Midnight was really there, a ghost from her past mysteriously returned. Sarah's thoughts turned to the marks she had seen on Midnight's body. They weren't consistent with the careful treatment Mark had promised. She had trusted him because he was a fellow trainer who understood the bond between horse and rider. He had sworn to give Midnight the best care, to never sell him, to keep him as the cherished companion he was. Something wasn't right. And as Sarah sat watching the barn where her beloved horse now rested, she felt a determination she hadn't experienced since before the accident. Whatever had happened to Midnight, however he had found his way back to her, she would protect him now. Somehow she would find a way to keep him, to make this impossible reunion permanent. She just needed to discover the truth first. Elena arrived just before 9, her weathered pickup truck bouncing down the gravel driveway. Sarah watched from the porch as her friend emerged from the vehicle, medical bag in hand. Elena's practical attire, jeans, boots, and a light jacket despite the spring warmth, reflected her no-nonsense approach to both animals and life. Her dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I half expected to arrive and find you'd had some sort of vivid dream," Elena called as she approached. The skepticism in her voice was clear despite her smile. "See for yourself," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the barn. She had spent the early morning hours with Midnight, brushing him with an old curry comb she'd found in a storage bin. The familiar rhythm of the task had been therapeutic, almost making her forget the strangeness of the situation. Together they walked to the barn, Sarah's cane tapping a steady rhythm against the packed earth. Elena slowed her naturally brisk pace to match her friend's. a consideration that Sarah both appreciated and resented. The injury had not only stolen her career, but had also transformed her relationships, adding an element of dependency she still struggled to accept. When they entered the barn, Midnight lifted his head from the hay Sarah had managed to scrounge for him. Elena stopped abruptly, her expression shifting from skepticism to astonishment. "Well, I'll be damned," she breathed. "It really is him." Midnight regarded Elena with what Sarah had always considered his analytical gaze, as if assessing whether she was friend or foe. After a moment, he nickered softly in recognition. "He remembers you," Sarah said, feeling a surge of validation. After 2 years, Midnight still recognized people from his past life. It wasn't just her imagination or wishful thinking. Elena approached the stall slowly, her trained eye already cataloging Midnight's condition. "He's underweight," she observed, running her hand along his flank. "Not severely, but enough to be concerning." She examined his coat, hooves, and teeth with methodical precision, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. "Roll up your sleeves, Elena," Sarah said quietly. "Look at his sides." Elena did as suggested, pushing Midnight's coat against the grain to reveal a series of thin, healed lacerations across his ribs. Her expression hardened. "These are whip marks," she stated flatly. "And not the kind that comes from occasional discipline. These are from repeated excessive force." Sarah felt her throat tighten. The confirmation of what she had suspected made her stomach clench with anger. "Mark wouldn't do this," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. She hadn't spoken to him in months. People changed. Circumstances changed. "I agree," Elena said, continuing her examination. "Mark is too experienced, too knowledgeable. These marks are from someone who either doesn't know better or doesn't care." She pointed to calluses on Midnight's legs. "And look at these, rope burns, possibly from hobbling. And these abrasions around his muzzle suggest a too tight halter or even a harsh bit." Sarah's hand instinctively reached for Midnight, gently stroking his neck. "What happened to you?" she whispered. Elena moved to examine Midnight's back, her practiced fingers probing along his spine. "There's muscle strain here consistent with carrying excessive weight or improper saddle fit." She straightened up, her expression grave. "Sarah, this horse hasn't been with Mark, at least not recently. These injuries tell a story of hard use without proper care." "But where was he? And how did he find me?" Sarah's questions hung in the air, unanswerable for now. Elena opened her medical bag and began treating the most recent of Midnight's wounds. "Have you reached Mark yet?" Sarah shook her head. "Still goes straight to voicemail. I've left 3 messages." "That's not like him," Elena commented. "Mark is usually reliable, even if you two haven't been in touch." As Elena worked, Sarah leaned against the stall door, her leg beginning to ache from standing too long. She had pushed herself this morning, moving around more than she had in months, driven by concern for Midnight. Now her body was reminding her of its limitations. "You should sit," Elena said, noticing Sarah's discomfort. "There's nothing you can do right now that I can't handle." "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, though she shifted her weight to her good leg. Elena gave her a knowing look. "You're the worst patient I've ever had, and I work with animals who bite. There's a stool in my truck. I'll grab it when I get the medications." After Elena had finished her examination and administered anti-inflammatory medication for Midnight's strained muscles, they sat outside the stall, watching as the horse dozed peacefully. "What are you going to do?" Elena asked. "You're not equipped to care for him right now, physically or financially." The blunt assessment stung, but Sarah couldn't deny its truth. Her disability payments barely covered her basic expenses. Caring for a horse properly, feed, veterinary care, farrier visits, was costly, and her physical limitations made daily care challenging. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. but I can't give him up again. Not after he somehow found his way back to me." Elena was silent for a moment, respecting the weight of her friend's decision. "Let me make some calls," she finally said. "I know a few people who might be willing to help with feed and care until we figure this out, and I'll keep trying to reach Mark. He might have answers about where Midnight has been." Sarah nodded gratefully. "I should report him missing, I suppose, though I'm not sure how to explain that he's missing from somewhere else but found here." "It's definitely an unusual situation," Elena agreed. "But we should at least check if anyone's reported a stolen horse matching his description." They were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Sarah stiffened. "Are you expecting someone?" Elena shook her head. "No. Are you?" Sarah struggled to her feet, grabbing her cane. "No one except the feed delivery I ordered this morning, but they're not due until afternoon." They made their way outside as a sleek black SUV pulled up beside Elena's truck. The windows were tinted, obscuring the driver. When the door opened, a tall man in expensive boots and a pressed shirt emerged. Despite his polished appearance, there was something hard about his features, a coldness in his eyes that made Sarah instinctively tense. "Can I help you?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The man surveyed the property before his gaze settled on Sarah. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," he said, his tone conversational but with an underlying edge. "A black quarter horse with a white star. I tracked him here." Sarah felt her heart race. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said automatically, even as her grip tightened on her cane. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, there's no need for that. I'm Jackson Wheeler, owner of the Western Star Rodeo. Your horse was part of our show until he escaped last night. Valuable animal. I've come to collect him." Sarah felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Rodeo. The marks on Midnight's body suddenly made terrible sense. Behind her, she heard Elena murmur, "Oh, Sarah." Wheeler took a step forward. "So, if you'll just point me to where he is, I'll be on my way. There's a show tomorrow, and I need my horse back." "He's not your horse," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "Midnight Storm belongs to me." Wheeler's expression hardened at Sarah's defiance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, extending it toward her with practiced confidence. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. I have the paperwork right here. Bill of sale, registration transfer, everything properly notarized. The horse is legally mine." Sarah didn't move to take the papers, her eyes never leaving Wheeler's face. Elena stepped forward instead, accepting the documents and scanning them quickly, her brow furrowing as she read. "This says you purchased the horse from Mark Reynolds 3 months ago," Elena said, looking up at Wheeler, "for a substantial amount." Wheeler nodded, his smile returning, though it remained cold and calculating. "That's right, $20,000. Reynolds was quite eager to sell, actually. Said something about financial troubles." He turned his attention back to Sarah. "I didn't realize the horse had a previous owner with such a strong attachment." Sarah felt as if she'd been struck. Mark had sold Midnight. After promising to keep him forever, after assuring her that the horse would always have a good home, he had sold him to a rodeo. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. "These papers may be legal," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "but they don't tell the whole story. Midnight was mine for 5 years before I entrusted him to Mark Reynolds. He promised never to sell him." Wheeler shrugged, unmoved by her distress. "That's between you and Reynolds. My transaction was entirely legitimate. Now I've got a business to run, and that horse is part of it." "Where is he?" "In the barn," Elena answered before Sarah could stop her. "But you should know that he's not in condition to perform. He has muscle strain, evidence of whipping, and various other injuries consistent with improper treatment." Wheeler's expression flickered briefly, a flash of annoyance quickly masked. My animals are well cared for. Whatever condition he's in is likely from his escape and journey here. He ran 30 miles through rough country, and yet somehow found his way to his original owner, Elena noted. That's quite remarkable, wouldn't you say? Wheeler ignored the comment, his attention fixed on Sarah. I understand this is difficult for you, but the fact remains that the horse is my property. I'm prepared to be reasonable about this. I'll give you some time to say goodbye, but I'm leaving with him today. Sarah felt a surge of protective fury. The thought of Midnight returning to whatever had caused those marks on his body was unbearable. No, she said simply. He's staying here. Wheeler's facade of civility slipped slightly. Ms. Collins, it is Collins, right? I admire your spirit, but you're not in a position to refuse. I have the legal documents. If you prevent me from taking my property, that's theft. Then call the sheriff, Sarah challenged. Let's see what he has to say about the condition my horse is in. I'm sure animal control would be interested as well. A muscle twitched in Wheeler's jaw. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Legal battles are expensive and time-consuming, and in the end, the papers don't lie. The horse belongs to me. Elena placed a hand on Sarah's arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. Mr. Wheeler, perhaps we can reach a compromise. Sarah could buy Midnight back from you. Wheeler laughed, a short, humorless sound. For what he's worth to my show, I doubt she could afford it. The casual dismissal stung, but Sarah refused to show it. Name your price, she said, though she had no idea how she would pay anything close to what Wheeler would demand. Wheeler studied her for a moment, taking in her modest home, her cane, her determined stance despite the obvious pain she was in. 30,000, he finally said. That's what he's worth to me now that he's been trained for the rodeo. The amount was impossible, more than Sarah had in savings, more than she could hope to borrow. But before she could respond, Elena stepped in again. That's robbery, and you know it. The horse is injured and would need rehabilitation before he could perform again, if ever. 15,000 is more reasonable. Wheeler's eyes narrowed. 25, and I want the money by the end of the week, or I'm taking him today with the sheriff if necessary. Sarah felt the situation slipping out of her control. There was no way she could raise that kind of money in a week. Her disability payments barely covered her expenses, and her savings had been depleted by medical bills. I need more time, she said. 2 weeks at least. Wheeler checked his watch with exaggerated deliberation. 1 week, and I'll need a good faith deposit today. 5,000. Otherwise, the horse leaves with me now. Sarah's mind raced. 5,000 was still an impossible sum, but it would buy her time. Time to figure out what had happened with Mark. Time to come up with a plan to keep Midnight. I can get you 2,000 today, Elena said suddenly, as a deposit. Sarah turned to her friend in surprise. Elena's practice was successful, but not so much that she could casually part with that kind of money. Wheeler considered the offer. Fine, 2,000 now, the rest within the week, but I want to see my horse before I leave. Without waiting for a response, he strode toward the barn, his confident gait suggesting he was accustomed to people following his commands without question. Sarah and Elena exchanged a glance before following him, Sarah's steps slowed by her disability and her reluctance to facilitate what felt like a betrayal of Midnight. Inside the barn, Midnight sensed the tension immediately. His ears flattened as Wheeler approached his stall and he backed away, pressing against the far wall. The reaction was telling. This was not the response of a horse to a caring owner. He's looking thin, Wheeler observed critically. What have you been feeding him? He just got here last night, Sarah replied, her tone icy, and I think you know exactly why he's thin. Wheeler ignored the accusation. instead reaching into the stall to grasp Midnight's halter. The horse jerked away, nostrils flaring in obvious distress. "Seems he needs a refresher on manners," Wheeler muttered, his casual tone belied by the hardness in his eyes. "Don't touch him," Sarah said, moving closer despite the pain in her leg. "The deposit buys you a week. Until then, he stays here and you stay away from him." Wheeler turned to her, his expression calculating. "As long as I get my money, or my horse, in a week, how you handle him is your business." He stepped back from the stall. "But make no mistake, Ms. Collins. One way or another, I will be compensated for my property." With that, he turned and walked out of the barn, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Sarah and Elena followed at a distance, watching as he returned to his SUV. "I'll expect that deposit by the end of the day," he called as he opened the driver's door. "I'll be staying at the Golden Pine Motel in town, room 14. His gaze lingered on Midnight's stall. "1 week, Ms. Collins, not a day more." As the SUV pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, Sarah turned to Elena, her face pale with the strain of the confrontation. "I can't let him take Midnight," she said. "Not after seeing how that man affected him. Not after Midnight came all this way to find me." Elena nodded, her expression grim but determined. "We'll figure something out. First, I need to make a few calls about that deposit, and we need to track down Mark Reynolds. Something about this whole situation doesn't add up." Sarah glanced back at the barn, where Midnight had cautiously moved to the front of his stall, watching them with those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to understand more than an animal should. "1 week," she murmured. "1 week to save him." Once Wheeler's SUV had disappeared down the road, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her leg throbbed mercilessly, the morning's stress and exertion taking their toll. Without a word, Elena guided her to the porch steps and helped her sit down. $2,000, Elena," Sarah finally said, looking up at her friend. "You can't afford that." Elena shrugged, though the gesture couldn't hide her concern. "The practice is doing well enough. Besides, it's just a deposit to buy us time." She sat beside Sarah, their shoulders touching in silent solidarity. "We'll figure this out." "How? Where am I going to get $23,000 in a week?" Sarah's voice cracked. "And why isn't Mark answering his phone? He promised me he would take care of Midnight." Elena placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "Let's focus on what we can control right now. I'll take care of the deposit today. Then we need to track down Mark and find out exactly what happened." Sarah nodded, trying to gather her thoughts. Wheeler mentioned the Golden Pine Motel. That's where the rodeo people usually stay when they come through town. A memory surfaced, bringing with it a glimmer of hope. Wait, the rodeo. If they're in town, that means they're performing at the county fairgrounds. My old assistant, Jamie, works there now. She might be able to help us learn more about Wheeler and his operation. Elena nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Information is power in this situation. They spent the next hour making calls. Elena arranged for a rush delivery of quality hay and grain for Midnight, while Sarah left another message for Mark, and then reached out to Jamie. To her relief, her former assistant answered immediately, her voice warm with surprise and pleasure. "Sarah, it's been ages. How are you doing?" The simple question carried layers of meaning. How was she coping with her injury? With the loss of her business? With the drastic change in her life? "I'm managing," Sarah replied, unwilling to delve into her struggles. "Listen, Jamie, I need information about the Western Star Rodeo. They're performing at the fairgrounds this week, right?" "Yes, they've been setting up since yesterday. They open tomorrow night and run through Sunday." Jamie's tone shifted, becoming curious. "Why do you ask? Are you coming to the show?" "Not exactly." Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. It's complicated, but I need to know about their operation, specifically about the owner, Jackson Wheeler. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Jamie spoke again, her voice was lower, more cautious. Wheeler has a reputation, not a good one. The way he treats his animals. She trailed off. Let's just say there have been complaints, but he has connections that seem to make problems disappear. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. What about his horses? Specifically a black quarter horse with a white star on his forehead. Midnight Storm, Jamie said immediately. That's what they call him in the show, at least. He's one of their newest attractions, only been with them a few months. Beautiful animal, but... She paused again. Sarah, what's going on? Why are you asking about Wheeler's horse? Because he's not Wheeler's horse, Sarah said firmly. He's mine, or he was, until I gave him to Mark Reynolds when I couldn't care for him anymore. Somehow Mark sold him to Wheeler, and last night, Midnight escaped from the rodeo and found his way to my place. The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jamie whispered, He found you? After all this time? Sarah, that's incredible. It would be a beautiful reunion story if Wheeler wasn't demanding $25,000 to let me keep him, Sarah replied bitterly. $25,000? That's outrageous. Jamie's indignation was clear. Listen, I have access to the fairgrounds and the backstage areas for the rodeo. I can do some digging, see what I can find out about Wheeler's operation, and maybe even about how he acquired Midnight. That would be incredibly helpful, Sarah said, feeling a small measure of relief. Thank you, Jamie. Don't thank me yet. Wheeler is dangerous when crossed, from what I've heard. Be careful, Sarah. The warning hung in the air. I'll call you tonight with whatever I can find out. After ending the call, Sarah relayed Jamie's information to Elena, who had just finished arranging for the feed delivery. If Wheeler's operation is as shady as Jamie suggests, maybe we can use that as leverage, Elena mused. If there are animal welfare violations, the authorities might get involved. That could backfire, Sarah cautioned. If his connections are as good as Jamie says, he might just take Midnight and disappear. We need more information before we make any moves. Elena nodded in agreement. I need to get back to the clinic for a few hours. Will you be okay here alone? Sarah glanced toward the barn where Midnight was resting. I'll be fine, and I'm not alone. After Elena left, promising to return with the deposit money later, Sarah made her way back to the barn. Her leg protested every step, but she ignored the pain. Inside, Midnight greeted her with a soft nicker, moving to the front of the stall as if he'd been waiting for her return. Hey, boy, she said softly, reaching through the bars to stroke his muzzle. Looks like we're in quite a situation here. Midnight nudged her hand gently, his eyes fixed on her face. In that moment, Sarah felt a resolve hardening within her. This horse had somehow found his way back to her across miles of unfamiliar territory. Their bond had transcended time and distance. She would not fail him again. I promise, Midnight, she whispered. I'll find a way to keep you safe. The afternoon passed quietly. Sarah divided her time between the barn and her laptop, researching everything she could find about Jackson Wheeler and the Western Star Rodeo. The information was sparse, a few promotional articles, some social media posts from rodeo attendees, but nothing substantive about the operation itself or its owner. The feed delivery arrived as promised, and Sarah supervised its unloading, grateful for Elena's foresight. With proper nutrition, Midnight's condition would improve, though the marks of his mistreatment would take longer to heal. As she measured out the evening's portion of grain, Sarah's phone rang. Her heart leaped, hoping it was Mark finally returning her calls. Instead, an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. She answered cautiously. Is this Sarah Collins? A male voice asked. Yes, who's this? My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm a veterinarian with the State Animal Welfare Board. The man's voice was professional but kind. I received a call from Dr. Elena Vasquez about a potentially concerning situation involving a horse that was previously in your ownership. Sarah's heart raced. Elena had escalated this to the state level without telling her. Yes, that's correct, she managed to say. Dr. Vasquez has documented evidence of mistreatment, and given the circumstances, I'd like to come assess the situation myself. We take allegations against commercial operations like rodeos very seriously. Hope flared in Sarah's chest, quickly tempered by caution. When would you want to come? I can be there tomorrow morning. Dr. Vasquez has offered to meet me there. There was a pause. Ms. Collins, I should warn you that these situations can become complicated. If there's evidence of abuse or neglect, we have protocols we must follow, regardless of ownership disputes. I understand, Sarah said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Would involving officials help her case or harm it? After ending the call, Sarah returned to Midnight's stall, her mind churning with new possibilities and concerns. The horse seemed to sense her agitation, moving closer to nuzzle her shoulder. Things are moving quickly, she told him, running her fingers through his mane. I just hope we're making the right moves. As dusk settled over the small farm, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, it was the call she'd been waiting for all day. Sarah? Mark Reynolds' voice was strained, almost unrecognizable. I just got your messages. I'm so sorry. You have to believe me. I never wanted to sell Midnight to that man. Mark. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. The storm of emotions, relief at finally hearing from him, anger at the betrayal, confusion about his claim, left her momentarily speechless. What happened? It's complicated, Mark said, his voice heavy with what sounded like exhaustion or defeat. Can we meet? I don't want to do this over the phone. Sarah glanced at her watch. It was already approaching evening. Where are you? About 2 hours away. I can drive to you tonight. Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted answers immediately, but the rational side of her knew that she needed time to process, to prepare for whatever explanation Mark might offer. Tomorrow morning, she decided. Elena will be here with someone from the State Animal Welfare Board. I think you should be here too. There was a pause, and Sarah could almost feel Mark's apprehension through the phone. The state authorities are involved now. Midnight showed up at my place with whip marks and rope burns, Mark, Sarah said, her voice hardening. What did you expect would happen? Mark's sigh was audible. I'll be there at 9. He hesitated again. Sarah, I know it's hard to believe right now, but I did try to protect him. I really did. After he hung up, Sarah stood motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, as if Mark might say more. Outside, the daylight was fading, casting long shadows across the barn floor. Midnight watched her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. He's coming tomorrow, she told the horse, reaching out to stroke his neck. We'll get some answers then. As darkness fell, Elena returned with the promised deposit money and a bag of takeout food. You haven't been eating properly, she admonished, setting out containers of pasta on Sarah's small kitchen table. And don't try to deny it, I can tell. While they ate, Sarah filled her in on the developments, Jamie's insights about Wheeler's reputation, the call from the state veterinarian, and Mark's imminent arrival. So Mark claims he didn't want to sell Midnight, Elena mused, twirling pasta around her fork. That suggests some form of coercion or desperation. Or it's just an excuse, Sarah countered, her trust in her old friend badly shaken. Either way, we'll know tomorrow. Elena nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. $2,000 as promised. I'll take it to Wheeler at the motel on my way home. Sarah stared at the envelope, the reality of the situation hitting her anew. I still don't know how I'm going to get the rest. Elena placed a hand over Sarah's. One problem at a time. Let's hear what Mark has to say, see what the state vet thinks, and go from there. After Elena left, Sarah returned to the barn for a final check on Midnight. The horse was dozing, his breathing deep and regular. The sight of him there in his old stall still seemed miraculous. Against all odds, he had found his way home. Sarah couldn't bear the thought of losing him again. She was preparing for bed when her phone rang once more. Jamie's name flashed on the screen. "Sarah, I found something," Jamie said without preamble, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "Several somethings, actually. Wheeler's operation is even worse than the rumors suggest." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly alert. "Tell me." "I managed to access their records while helping set up the registration system for tomorrow's show. Wheeler has had multiple complaints filed against him in different states. Animal cruelty, unsafe conditions, even fraud. But he keeps moving his operation before authorities can pin anything on him." "That matches what the state vet said about taking these allegations seriously," Sarah murmured. "There's more," Jamie continued. "I took photos of some of the animals in their care. The conditions are appalling, and I overheard one of the handlers talking about Midnight. Apparently, Wheeler was furious about his escape. He's been using him as one of the main attractions in a dangerous stunt riding segment, even though the horse isn't fully trained for it. That's probably where the injuries came from." Sarah felt sick at the thought of Midnight being forced to perform dangerous stunts. "Did you find anything about how Wheeler acquired him?" "That's the interesting part," Jamie said, her voice dropping as if afraid of being overheard. "I found the purchase records. Wheeler did pay $20,000 for Midnight, but not to Mark Reynolds directly. The payment went to a company called Frontier Holdings, LLC. Reynolds' signature is on the transfer papers, but something about it seemed off to me." "What do you mean?" "I've seen Mark's signature on fairground contracts before, when he used to bring horses for events. This one looked different. I'm not saying it's forged, but it's worth looking into." A glimmer of hope sparked in Sarah's chest. If the sale wasn't legitimate, if there was fraud involved, it could change everything. "Jamie, this is incredibly helpful. Can you send me copies of everything you found?" "Already done. Check your email." Jamie paused. "But Sarah, be careful. I also heard Wheeler talking to someone on the phone about dealing with the situation. He sounded threatening. Whatever you do, don't confront him alone." After the call ended, Sarah immediately checked her email. Jamie had sent a comprehensive file, photos of animals in poor condition, scanned documents with suspicious signatures, records of complaints from multiple jurisdictions. It was damning evidence, but would it be enough to challenge Wheeler's claim on Midnight? Sarah forwarded everything to Elena with a brief explanation, then opened another email to Dr. Reeves from the State Animal Welfare Board, attaching the same files. She hesitated before sending, aware that once she involved state authorities, the situation would be out of her hands. But Midnight's well-being had to come first, even if it meant losing control of the outcome. She pressed send, then returned to examining the documents more carefully. The signature on the transfer papers did look strange. The loops and curves of Mark's name seemed forced, almost mechanical. And the company name, Frontier Holdings, LLC, triggered a vague memory. Hadn't Mark mentioned a business partner pressuring him about something the last time they'd spoken months ago? As Sarah's mind worked through the puzzle, her eyelids grew heavy. The emotional and physical toll of the day was catching up with her. She set her phone on the nightstand and switched off the lamp, promising herself she would tackle everything with fresh eyes in the morning. In the darkness, her thoughts drifted to Midnight. How had he known where to find her? What instinct or memory had guided him over 30 miles of unfamiliar territory to her new home? It seemed impossible, yet he was here, carrying the evidence of his mistreatment and the mystery of his journey. Tomorrow would bring Mark's explanation, the state veterinarian's assessment, and perhaps a clearer path forward. For now, Sarah took comfort in knowing that Midnight was safe in his stall, that he had found his way back to her, despite everything that had happened. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was a simple prayer. Please let me find a way to keep him this time. Sarah woke before dawn, her mind immediately racing with the day's challenges. She'd slept fitfully, dreams of Midnight running from shadowy figures interspersed with images of Wheeler's cold smile. Outside, the first hints of light were just beginning to touch the horizon as she made her way to the barn, moving slowly to accommodate her aching leg. Midnight greeted her with a soft nicker, already standing alert at the front of his stall. In just the day he'd been back, his eyes seemed brighter, his posture more relaxed. Sarah fed him the quality grain Elena had delivered, watching as he ate with healthy appetite. "Today's important, boy," she told him, her voice quiet in the stillness of early morning. "Everyone's coming. Elena, the state vet, Mark. We're going to figure this out." Midnight lifted his head at Mark's name, ears pricking forward as if he recognized it. Sarah wondered what memories the horse associated with her friend, good ones from the early days or confused ones from whatever circumstances had led to his sale to Wheeler. By 8:30, Sarah had showered, dressed, and prepared a pot of coffee, her nerves making it impossible to eat anything. She'd reviewed Jamie's documents again, focusing on the suspicious signature and the company name, Frontier Holdings LLC. A quick internet search had revealed little about the company beyond its registration in a state known for corporate anonymity. At precisely 9 o'clock, the crunch of tires on gravel announced the first arrival. Elena's truck pulled up, followed by a white SUV with official state emblems on the doors. Sarah stepped onto the porch as Elena and a tall, distinguished man in his 50s approached. "Sarah, this is Dr. Daniel Reeves," Elena introduced them. "Daniel, Sarah Collins." Dr. Reeves shook Sarah's hand firmly. "Ms. Collins, Dr. Vasquez has briefed me on the situation. I've also reviewed the files you sent last night." His expression was grave. "If they're accurate, we may be dealing with a significant case of animal welfare violations." "Thank you for coming," Sarah said. "Midnight's in the barn. I'd like you to see him before Mark arrives." They walked to the barn together, Sarah setting the pace with her cane. Inside, Midnight stood watching them, his intelligent gaze assessing the newcomer. "This is the horse in question?" Dr. Reeves asked, approaching the stall with professional interest. "Yes, Midnight Storm," Sarah confirmed. "I owned him for 5 years before my accident. When I could no longer care for him properly, I gave him to Mark Reynolds, who apparently sold him to Jackson Wheeler of the Western Star Rodeo 3 months ago." Dr. Reeves nodded, opening the stall door and entering with the confident movements of someone used to handling horses. Midnight remained calm, allowing the veterinarian to examine him thoroughly. Reeves was methodical, documenting each mark and injury with photographs and notes, occasionally murmuring to himself. "These lacerations are consistent with whip marks," he confirmed, echoing Elena's earlier assessment. "And these calluses indicate improper restraint. The muscle strain along his back suggests he was ridden too hard or by someone too heavy." He ran his hands along Midnight's legs. "There's also evidence of minor joint stress that could develop into something more serious without proper care." He stepped back, his expression hardening. "This horse has been mistreated, no question. I've seen similar patterns in other performance animals pushed beyond their limits." Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow at the official confirmation. "Will this help us keep him from Wheeler?" "It complicates matters," Dr. Reeves admitted. Animal cruelty is a serious charge, but ownership disputes are civil matters. However, with the evidence your friend provided about Wheeler's operation, we might have grounds for a larger investigation. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of another vehicle drew their attention. Through the barn door, she could see a dusty pickup truck parking beside Elena's vehicle. Mark had arrived. Sarah steeled herself for the confrontation, uncertain whether she would find her old friend or a stranger in the man who had betrayed her trust. Elena seemed to sense her tension, moving closer in silent support. Mark entered the barn slowly, his usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his face lined with stress, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. When his eyes met Sarah's, she saw shame and regret clearly written there. "Sarah," he began, then stopped as his gaze moved past her to Midnight. The horse had gone completely still, ears forward, eyes fixed on Mark. For a moment, no one spoke, the tension palpable. Then Midnight broke the silence with a snort, turning his head away from Mark in what seemed like deliberate dismissal. "He remembers," Mark said softly, pain evident in his voice. "What happened, Mark?" Sarah demanded, her tone sharper than she'd intended. "You promised me you would never sell him." Mark's eyes dropped to the ground. "I didn't want to. You have to believe that." He took a deep breath. "About 4 months ago, I ran into financial trouble. Bad investments, a failed business partnership. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I was desperate, facing bankruptcy." "So you sold Midnight to a rodeo?" Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. "No," Mark said firmly, looking up again. "I would never. But Wheeler, he approached me out of nowhere, offering to buy Midnight. I refused, told him the horse wasn't for sale at any price. That's when things got ugly." Dr. Reeves stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Dr. Daniel Reeves with the State Animal Welfare Board. Are you saying you were coerced into selling this horse?" Mark looked startled by the official presence but nodded. "Wheeler discovered I owed money to a company called Frontier Holdings. I later found out he was behind that company. He'd bought my debt specifically to use as leverage. He threatened to force me into bankruptcy if I didn't sell him Midnight." His voice dropped. "I had employees depending on me, other animals to care for. I couldn't lose everything." "The signature on the sale documents," Sarah said. "Jamie thought it looked strange." Mark grimaced. "Because it's not mine. Not exactly. Wheeler had me sign a blank form, supposedly acknowledging the debt. He must have used that signature on the transfer papers." "That's fraud," Elena interjected. "It is," Dr. Reeves agreed. "And combined with the evidence of animal mistreatment, it could be enough to challenge Wheeler's ownership claim." Hope flared in Sarah's chest, but Mark's expression remained troubled. "It's not that simple. Wheeler has connections, people who protect him, and he's not above using intimidation to get what he wants." "He's threatened you?" Dr. Reeves asked sharply. Mark nodded. "Not directly. He's too smart for that. But his message was clear. Cause trouble, and there would be consequences." Sarah moved closer to Midnight's stall, placing her hand on the horse's neck. "I don't care about his threats. I'm not letting him take Midnight back to that rodeo." "There may be a legal path forward," Dr. Reeves said thoughtfully. "If Mr. Reynolds is willing to sign an affidavit about the fraudulent transfer, and with the documentation of the horse's condition, we could petition for a temporary stay on any transfer of ownership." "I'll sign whatever you need," Mark said without hesitation. "I want to make this right, Sarah. I never should have given in to Wheeler's pressure." Sarah studied her old friend, the anger she'd felt gradually giving way to understanding. Mark had been caught in an impossible situation, forced to choose between his employees' livelihoods and his promise to her. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but she could at least acknowledge the difficulty of his position. "Thank you," she said simply. The moment was interrupted by the sudden ringing of Sarah's phone. Jamie's name flashed on the screen. "Jamie? What's wrong?" Sarah asked, immediately sensing the urgency from her friend's tone. "Wheeler knows," Jamie said, her voice tight with fear. "He knows I took those documents. Someone saw me. He's on his way to you now. And Sarah, he's bringing the sheriff." Sarah's heart pounded as she relayed Jamie's warning to the others. Dr. Reeves immediately pulled out his phone, making a quick call to his office to request emergency legal support. Elena moved to stand beside Sarah, her presence a silent promise of solidarity. Mark's face had gone pale, but determination replaced the shame in his eyes. "We need to be ready," Dr. Reeves said after ending his call. "Wheeler may have legal documents, but we have evidence of fraud and animal abuse. The sheriff will have to consider both sides." "Wheeler's counting on his relationship with the sheriff," Mark warned. "They're hunting buddies. Sheriff Dawson has looked the other way before when it comes to Wheeler's operation." Dr. Reeves frowned. "That complicates things, but I'm a state official. The sheriff will have to acknowledge my authority in animal welfare cases." They didn't have long to prepare. Within minutes, the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed broke the morning quiet. Sarah moved to Midnight's stall, a protective instinct driving her to stand between the horse and whatever was coming. The others followed her to the barn entrance, forming an impromptu barrier. 2 vehicles pulled up beside the others, Wheeler's black SUV and a tan sheriff's department cruiser. Wheeler emerged first, his expression thunderous. Sheriff Dawson followed more slowly, a heavy-set man with a weathered face and wary eyes. His gaze swept over the assembled group, lingering on Dr. Reeves and his official vehicle. "Ms. Collins," Wheeler called as he strode toward them, confidence in every step. "I understand you've been spreading some ugly rumors about my operation, and it seems you've been harboring a thief as well." He gestured toward the fairgrounds, where Jamie presumably was. "Your friend has been stealing confidential business documents." "Mr. Wheeler," Dr. Reeves stepped forward, his tone professionally neutral but firm. "I'm Dr. Daniel Reeves, State Animal Welfare Board. We're conducting an official investigation into allegations of animal mistreatment in your rodeo operation." Wheeler faltered momentarily, but recovered quickly. "Sheriff, I came here to recover stolen property and address corporate espionage. Whatever complaint this woman has filed is a transparent attempt to avoid paying for a horse she wants to keep." Sheriff Dawson approached slowly, his discomfort evident. "Morning, folks. Seems we've got ourselves a situation here." He nodded to Dr. Reeves. "Doctor didn't expect state involvement in a local property dispute." "This is more than a property dispute, Sheriff," Dr. Reeves replied. "We have documented evidence of animal cruelty and potential fraud in the transfer of ownership of this horse." Wheeler scoffed. "Ridiculous. I have the bill of sale right here, signed by Mark Reynolds." He produced the now familiar document from his jacket pocket. "The horse is legally mine. I've been more than generous offering to sell him back to Ms. Collins." "That signature was obtained fraudulently," Mark said, stepping forward. "I never agreed to sell Midnight to you. You coerced me by buying my debt and threatening bankruptcy." Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Reynolds. That's slander. You're just having seller's remorse because your friend is upset." The sheriff looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "Perhaps we should all calm down. If there's a dispute over the sale, that's a civil matter that needs to be settled in court. As for now, the documentation shows Mr. Wheeler as the legal owner." "Sheriff," Dr. Reeves interjected, "I need to show you something before any decisions are made." He retrieved his tablet, displaying the photographs he'd taken of Midnight's injuries. "These are documented signs of mistreatment on this horse. As a state official, I have the authority to place an animal under protective custody pending investigation, if there's evidence of abuse. Sheriff Dawson studied the images with a frown. Wheeler, care to explain these? Wheeler waved a dismissive hand. Rodeo horses get minor injuries all the time. It's part of the job, and any marks you see likely came from his escape and 30-mile journey through rough country. That's not consistent with these injuries, Dr. Reeves countered. These are systematic marks of mistreatment over time, and we have additional evidence suggesting a pattern of abuse across your operation. Wheeler's confident facade cracked slightly. What additional evidence? What are you talking about? Documents and photographs from multiple venues showing similar conditions for other animals in your care, Dr. Reeves replied calmly. Complaints filed in 3 different states that mysteriously disappeared before investigations could be completed. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. That true, Wheeler? It's nonsense, Wheeler snapped. Fabricated by someone with a grudge, probably Ms. Collins or her thieving friend. Actually, Mark said, I've signed an affidavit confirming that you coerced me into signing documents under false pretenses, and I'm prepared to testify that you deliberately misrepresented the intended use of the horse when pressuring me. Wheeler's face darkened with anger. This is absurd. Sheriff, I have legal ownership papers. I demand you help me recover my property immediately. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, clearly torn between his friendship with Wheeler and the mounting evidence against him. Jackson, if there's an official state investigation underway, there is, Dr. Reeves confirmed, and pending its completion, I'm invoking my authority to place this horse in protective custody. He turned to Sarah. Ms. Collins has appropriate facilities and a documented history as the animal's previous owner. I recommend she serve as temporary custodian. Wheeler took a threatening step forward. You can't do this. That horse is worth a small fortune to my operation. Without him, the featured act in tonight's show can't go on. That's your concern, not ours, Elena said coldly. The sheriff held up his hands. All right, let's all take a breath. Dr. Reeves, you have the paperwork for this protective custody order. My office is preparing it as we speak, Dr. Reeves replied. It should be here within the hour. In the meantime, I'm verbally instituting the order, which is within my authority. Wheeler looked from face to face, realizing he was outnumbered. His expression hardened into something dangerous. This isn't over, not by a long shot. He turned to the sheriff. Dawson, I expect your support when I challenge this in court. Remember who helped fund your last campaign. The threat hung in the air, blatant and ugly. The sheriff's face reddened, embarrassment and anger warring in his expression. That's enough, Wheeler. You're not helping your case here. Wheeler's gaze fixed on Sarah with such malice that she instinctively gripped her cane tighter. You think you've won? This is just beginning. By the time my lawyers are finished with you, you'll wish you'd never seen that horse again. With that, he turned and stalked back to his SUV, slamming the door before racing down the driveway in a spray of gravel. The sheriff remained, looking decidedly uncomfortable. I'm sorry about that, folks. Wheeler can be intense. He turned to Dr. Reeves. I'll need a copy of that custody order for my files when it arrives. Of course, Sheriff, Dr. Reeves agreed, and I'd appreciate your department's cooperation as we expand our investigation into Mr. Wheeler's operation. After the sheriff departed, promising to return later for the paperwork, Sarah felt her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. The confrontation had drained what little energy she had. Elena noticed immediately, guiding her to a nearby hay bale to sit. We did it, Elena said, her voice tinged with disbelief. At least for now. Wheeler won't give up easily, Mark warned. He's vindictive, and he has resources. Dr. Reeves nodded in agreement. This is only a temporary solution. The investigation will take time, and Wheeler will almost certainly file a legal challenge. Sarah looked toward Midnight, who had watched the entire confrontation with alert interest. Now, as if sensing the danger had passed, he had returned to calmly eating his hay. "At least he's safe for now," she said. "We'll deal with whatever comes next." Mark knelt beside her, his expression earnest. "Sarah, I meant what I said. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." She studied him, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "I know you will, Mark." She paused, then added, "But there's something I still don't understand. How did Midnight find me? How did he know where I live now?" Mark's expression softened at Sarah's question. He glanced toward Midnight, who was now watching them intently, as if understanding he was the subject of their conversation. "I think I might know," Mark said quietly. "About a month before Wheeler took him, I brought Midnight to a competition about 5 miles from here. Remember Thomas Fletcher? He hosted that small dressage event at his new place." Sarah nodded slowly. "I remember Thomas. He bought land near here after I moved. We were there for 2 days. Midnight was different during that visit. Restless, constantly alert, like he was searching for something." Mark's voice grew softer. "The second evening, he actually broke out of his temporary stall. We found him 2 hours later heading east in this direction. I didn't think much of it then, but now—" "You think he sensed I was nearby?" Sarah asked, the idea simultaneously fantastical and somehow perfectly logical. Dr. Reeves, who had been listening quietly, offered his professional perspective. "Horses have remarkable spatial memory and sensory capabilities. There are documented cases of horses finding their way home over incredible distances. If he associated you with home and had been in the vicinity before, and the rodeo grounds are only 30 miles away," Elena added, "it's within the realm of possibility." Sarah reached out to stroke Midnight's muzzle as he stretched his neck toward her over the stall door. "You were looking for me even then," she murmured. The thought filled her with a warmth that pushed back against the lingering chill of Wheeler's threats. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity. Dr. Reeves received the official protective custody documents electronically, printed copies for everyone involved, and ensured the sheriff received his. Mark provided a detailed written statement about Wheeler's coercive tactics and the fraudulent transfer. Elena made calls to arrange for continued feed deliveries and to reschedule her veterinary appointments so she could remain available if needed. By early afternoon, a tentative calm had settled over the farm. Dr. Reeves had departed to begin the formal investigation into Wheeler's rodeo operation, promising to keep them informed of any developments. Elena had gone to her clinic for a few hours, but would return later. Mark remained, his truck now parked beside the barn as he helped Sarah repair parts of the fencing that had deteriorated from disuse. As they worked, Mark handling the heavy lifting while Sarah directed and assisted where she could, a companionable silence grew between them, echoing their years of friendship before everything had changed. "I keep thinking about him finding you," Mark said eventually, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "It's like something from a movie." Sarah smiled, watching Midnight graze peacefully in the small paddock they had just finished securing. "I still can hardly believe it myself. When I woke up and saw him standing there in the moonlight—" She shook her head. "It felt impossible." "Maybe some connections are too strong to break," Mark suggested, his tone wistful. "Even when everything else falls apart." Sarah knew he wasn't just talking about her and Midnight. Their friendship had been another casualty of her accident and the difficult decisions that followed. "Mark," she began, "I understand why you did what you did. The impossible position Wheeler put you in." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't make excuses for me. I should have found another way. I should have told you what was happening, asked for help." "Would you have?" Sarah challenged. "When I was struggling just to get through each day, when I couldn't even help myself?" Mark looked at her directly, his expression serious. "You've always been stronger than you give yourself credit for, Sarah. Even now, with everything you've been through." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching tires drew their attention. Elena's truck appeared, but she wasn't alone. Jamie was in the passenger seat, looking nervous but determined. "I brought reinforcements," Elena announced as they exited the vehicle. "Jamie has more information about Wheeler, and she's willing to make an official statement for Dr. Reeves." Jamie approached, offering Sarah a quick, tight hug. "I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner about Wheeler coming. One of his men saw me accessing the files and reported back immediately." "You did more than enough," Sarah assured her. "Dr. Reeves said your evidence was crucial." "Well, I have more," Jamie said, her expression grim. "After Wheeler left the fairgrounds this morning, I overheard his assistant on the phone. They're planning to file an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning to try to overturn the protective custody order, and they're bringing in a big city lawyer who specializes in these cases." Sarah felt her momentary peace evaporate. "So we don't have much time." "No," Jamie agreed. "But I also found something else that might help." She pulled out her phone, displaying a video. "This is from last week's show in Ridgefield. It shows Wheeler forcing Midnight to perform despite obvious signs of distress. I've got 3 more videos like it from different performances." Mark viewed the video, his face darkening with anger. "That bastard. No wonder Midnight has those injuries." Elena examined the footage with a professional eye. This clearly demonstrates willful disregard for the horse's welfare. It strengthens our case considerably. Despite the promising evidence, Sarah couldn't shake her concern. Wheeler has money and connections. Even with all this, he could still win in court. "Then we need to make sure the court of public opinion is firmly on our side," Jamie suggested. "The rodeo opens tonight. People should know what kind of operation they're supporting." The suggestion hung in the air, bold and risky. Wheeler had already demonstrated his willingness to play dirty. Challenging him publicly could escalate the situation dangerously. "It's worth considering," Elena said cautiously, "but we need to be strategic. Wheeler won't hesitate to retaliate." As they discussed potential approaches, Sarah found her attention drawn to Midnight. The horse had stopped grazing and was standing alert, his ears pricked toward the driveway. A moment later, they all heard what had caught his attention, the distant sound of an engine. "Are we expecting anyone else?" Mark asked, tension evident in his voice. Sarah shook her head, already moving toward the paddock gate, her cane forgotten as concern for Midnight overrode her physical limitations. "Get him into the barn," she instructed Mark, who immediately moved to comply. They barely had Midnight secured in his stall when a vehicle appeared, not Wheeler's SUV as they'd feared, but a modest sedan they didn't recognize. It parked beside Elena's truck, and a woman in a crisp business suit emerged, carrying a leather portfolio. "Ms. Collins," she called, approaching with confident strides. "My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm an attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Dr. Reeves suggested I might be of assistance in your case against Jackson Wheeler." Sarah and her friends exchanged surprised glances. "That was fast," Elena murmured. Rebecca offered a professional smile. "When it comes to protecting animals from people like Wheeler, we believe in moving quickly. May we talk inside? We have a lot to cover before Wheeler's lawyer files that injunction tomorrow morning." The week that followed Midnight's miraculous return unfolded with an intensity that left Sarah breathless. Rebecca Lawson proved to be exactly what they needed, a fierce advocate with extensive experience battling animal exploitation. She coordinated with Dr. Reeves to strengthen their case, prepared counterarguments to Wheeler's injunction, and helped Jamie organize the evidence in a compelling narrative. Wheeler's emergency injunction was denied, Largely due to Rebecca's skillful presentation of the evidence of mistreatment and the questionable circumstances of the sale, the judge extended the protective custody order pending a full hearing, scheduled for the following month. It wasn't a final victory, but it bought them precious time. Meanwhile, Wheeler's Rodeo opened to unexpectedly sparse crowds. Jamie had quietly shared the videos of animal mistreatment with local animal rights groups, who organized a peaceful but highly visible protest outside the fairgrounds. Local news picked up the story, and by the second night, attendance had dropped so dramatically that Wheeler was forced to cancel the remaining shows, claiming technical difficulties. On a bright morning, 10 days after Midnight's return, Sarah sat on her porch watching the horse graze peacefully in the paddock. His physical transformation was remarkable. His coat now gleamed in the sunlight. The wounds had begun to heal, and he had regained some of the weight he'd lost. More striking was the change in his demeanor. The nervous, defensive animal that had arrived that first night was gone, replaced by the confident, gentle horse she remembered. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. Mark climbed the porch steps, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He had been staying in the small guest room, helping with repairs around the property and sharing in Midnight's care. Their relationship remained complicated, but the shared purpose of protecting Midnight had begun to heal old wounds. "Rebecca called," Mark said, handing Sarah a mug. "Wheeler's leaving town. Apparently, the state investigations in 3 counties have him spooked. He's canceled the rest of his tour dates." Sarah sipped her coffee, letting the news sink in. "Running before they can build a stronger case against him?" "Probably. Rebecca thinks it's a good sign for us, but cautions that he might still fight for ownership from a distance. His lawyer hasn't withdrawn from the case." They sat in companionable silence, watching Midnight. The horse had developed a new habit of frequently looking toward the house, as if reassuring himself that Sarah was still there. Whenever their eyes met across the distance, Sarah felt a renewal of the bond that had somehow guided him back to her. "I've been thinking," Mark said eventually. "My place is too big for just me since most of my horses are gone. I've been considering selling it for a while." Sarah glanced at him, uncertain where this was leading. "What if I sold the property and used part of the money to become a partner in this place?" Mark continued. "We could rebuild it together. Not as big as your old training stable, but enough to support a few horses. Midnight could stay here permanently, and you could take on some training clients again, the ones who don't require physical demonstrations." Sarah stared at him, surprised by the proposal. "Mark, you don't have to do that. Your financial troubles are sorted," he finished for her. "Wheeler wasn't lying about the money he paid for Midnight. I used it to clear my debts. The property is free and clear and worth considerably more than I paid for it." He looked at her earnestly. "This isn't about guilt or obligation, Sarah. It's about finding a way forward that works for all of us, you, me, and Midnight." The possibility unfurled in Sarah's mind. A smaller, manageable operation that could accommodate her limitations while allowing her to return to the work she loved. And Midnight would be there, home for good. "I'll think about it," she promised. Later that afternoon, Elena arrived with news of her own. "The state board is pursuing formal charges against Wheeler for animal cruelty," she announced as she examined Midnight's healing wounds. "They've also alerted authorities in the next 3 states on his tour route. He's going to find it hard to do business anywhere for a while." "What about Midnight's legal status?" Sarah asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind since that first night. "Rebecca thinks we have a strong case for invalidating Wheeler's ownership based on the fraudulent transfer," Elena replied, "especially now that Mark has provided a full statement about how Wheeler manipulated the sale. It's not guaranteed, but the odds are in our favor." As Elena prepared to leave, she paused, studying Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I haven't seen you use your cane much these past few days." Sarah blinked in surprise, realizing Elena was right. In the chaos and activity of protecting Midnight, she had been moving more, relying on the cane less. The pain was still there, but somehow more manageable. "I guess I've been too busy to notice." Elena smiled knowingly. Sometimes the best therapy isn't physical at all. Having purpose again, something to fight for, that can be more healing than any medical treatment. After Elena departed, Sarah made her way to the barn for Midnight's evening feeding. The horse greeted her with his usual soft nicker, pushing his nose against her shoulder in gentle affection. As she measured grain and checked his water, Sarah found herself talking to him as she always had, sharing the developments of the day and her thoughts about Mark's proposal. "What do you think, boy? Should we rebuild this place together? Make it a real home again?" Midnight's ears flicked toward her, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face. "You'd have to share me with other horses, but you'd always be special. The one who came home against all odds." In the quiet of the barn, with Midnight's steady breathing the only sound, Sarah felt a certainty settle within her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Wheeler's potential legal fight, the physical limitations she would always face, the complications of rebuilding her life and business, she would face them. Midnight had crossed 30 miles of unknown territory to find her, guided by a bond that defied rational explanation. The least she could do was show the same determination in forging their path forward. 3 months later, a small sign appeared at the entrance to the property. "Second Chance Stables," it read in elegant script, with silhouettes of 2 horses beneath the words. The once neglected farm had undergone a transformation. Fences repaired, barn expanded, a small covered arena constructed to allow for training in all weather. Sarah stood beside the sign, Midnight at her side, as Mark affixed the final screw. Her cane rested against the fence post, still necessary on bad days but increasingly forgotten on good ones. 2 new horses had already joined their small operation, with inquiries from potential clients coming in steadily, as word spread of their specialized approach to training. "What do you think?" Mark asked, stepping back to admire the sign. Sarah looked from the sign to Midnight, who stood calmly beside her without halter or lead rope, his presence as constant and reassuring as the sunrise. "I think it's perfect," she said, her hand resting on Midnight's neck. "A second chance for all of us." Midnight nickered softly as if in agreement, his eyes reflecting the afternoon sun. In that moment, Sarah felt the full circle of their journey, from loss to reunion, from despair to renewal. The impossible horse who had found his way home had helped her find her way as well, back to purpose, back to hope, back to a future she had thought forever lost. Some bonds, it seemed, were truly unbreakable, transcending distance, circumstance, and even understanding. As Sarah led Midnight back toward their barn, their home, she knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would ever be lost again.